Hello and welcome to PFI Talks, brought to you by Prague Finance Institute, an affiliate of the leading Czech economics research center Sergei EI. My name is Leoš Rusek. I'm the head of communications at PPF Group and also the host of this podcast. And it's my pleasure today to welcome Daron Acemoglu, a professor of economics at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, better known as MIT, and also a prolific author on topics, among others, covering the impact of technological innovation. Hello, Professor.
Hi, thank you for having me on your program.
Let's start a little more broadly. What drew you to the study of economics initially? What was the pull? What made you so interested, and you've been at it for so long?
Well, I've been at it for very long, shows my age, but I was growing up in Turkey in the 1980s, and those were tumultuous times. Turkey had a military coup, had a controlled transition from military dictatorship to democracy. Its economy was doing very badly. And I started becoming drawn to these topics, actually wondering about the sorts of questions that I later took on. For example, in my book with James Robinson, Why Nations Fail, what's the relationship between democracy and economic growth? And why do some countries end up with bad arrangements? Why can't they democratize? Why is there so much depression in Turkey? Why isn't there freedom of the media? So those were the sort of questions that I wanted to study, and I thought economics would be the discipline that would have the answers. I didn't know much about economics. It turns out that it wasn't really the focus of the discipline of economics at the time. But once I started studying it, I liked what economics was trying to do. It being quantitative, rigorous, and data-driven in questions of social science appealed to me. And then it was only later, after my PhD, that I started coming back to the same issues. And so it's been a very, very enriching journey for me.
Well, thanks for mentioning definitely what's now the bestseller of yours, Why Nation Fails book. But can I also mention your most recent book, and it's the Power and Progress, and I think, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I think about in May you published a research paper on the impact of AI, and you do touch on AI in the book, and but that paper, if I may try to summarize the outcome, is like that you are trying to come up with a quantitative answer to how much AI is going to contribute to raising global GDP. And your estimates, because you give a range, you're probably hedging, but nevertheless, even within the range, you are below 1 percentage point. And, what we hear from all sorts of other sort of like evangelists of AI is that, the growth could be at least several percentage points. So can you maybe give us your own summary of that paper and why you actually are so pessimistic in terms of like the numbers?
Well, thank you for mentioning Power and Progress, my most recent book, which I co-authored with Simon Johnson. Yeah, it's actually sort of nice to mention that after Why Nations Fail, because Why Nations Fail captured one aspect of what really drew me to economics, which is the question of institutions, long-run economic development, underdevelopment, dictatorship, and democracy. But another aspect was really understanding the effects of technological change, in particular, how, what we do and how we expand our knowledge impacts human society, inequality, who benefits, who loses. And Power and Progress deals with these issues. It deals with them from a historical perspective, but it brings it all the way to our current debates on AI. And part of the reason why we wrote the book, and we wrote it at this point and in this particular way, is because we were already troubled when we started working on this book in 2019, 2020, about the techno-optimism that the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and their boosters within US media were trying to sell to the public. Don't worry, these are amazing technologies. Everything's going to be fine. You just need to trust the technology experts. And we thought that was a recommendation and a way of thinking about what awaits us that stands in very stark contrast with our historical experience, both recent history and distant history. And we intended Power and Progress to be an inquiry into what it takes for us to use our collective knowledge, our scientific knowledge, for shared prosperity. And all of these concerns, of course, have multiplied since the publication of the book with the rapid spread of AI technologies, in particular generative AI, large language model tools. Mm-hmm. And the hype and the optimism have only multiplied. And the hype is really very intense in the United States, and I think is now spreading to Europe. And it's got two very, very negative implications. One is that it is convincing the public to be passive. Mm-hmm. Don't worry, everything's going to be fine. These are just amazing technologies. All you need to do is sit back and just get ready for the technological avalanche. That's the sort of the message that many people in the United States are getting. And second, it's actually convincing companies to start using these technologies before they are ready and before the technologies are ready. So when businesses start using AI for things that humans were doing before, that has a lot of negative effects because people are being displaced from their work. At least if you're doing it right and if the technology is really so good, you might get productivity gains. But the experience we have so far is not really encouraging on the productivity gains. And part of it is because a lot of the adoption is being done in a haphazard way because of the hype. And so I decided to critically evaluate some of the macroeconomic implications of generative AI technologies that people have been suggesting. So there have been reports by the McKinsey Global Institute, by Goldman Sachs, saying that generative AI and AI tools in general can increase GDP growth within the next 10 years per annum every year by 3 or 4 percentage points. The Economist magazine is even more optimistic. They think AI is going to revolutionize everything and is going to bring amazing gains for everybody. So I try to sort of put some discipline on this, saying, what does economic theory tell us? What do we know about the numbers of tasks that are going to be impacted and the productivity gains? And when you do those calculations, you end up with something much, much, much smaller. Instead of 3 or 4 percentage points increase per annum, my estimates show that you're not going to get something more than 1% increase within 10 years, which is not bad. I'll take that. But it's not going to be transformative. And if you try to rush too much, you're probably going to get even much less. So it's very important to sort of have some degree of realism. And I think this hype, for example, just OpenAI's one of the top executives this week, I think, was saying, we're going to have PhD level intelligence from our next tool. I mean, that's just such a crazy claim. That is so unserious. How can you even claim that something like GPT-4 has PhD level intelligence? When you think about it, all it's doing is able to sort of find some sort of information within its vast database, whereas human intelligence, even that of a middle schooler, is so much more versatile, so much more multifaceted, so much more creative, so much more extrapolative. It's just so unserious when people are saying that, and it cannot be in good faith.
So do you think we do need to approach it? I mean, can your research help come up with a sensible way of regulating it, or should we just leave it up to the market forces to?
No, I think my research says, from history, from economic theory, from social science more broadly, you cannot just leave it to the market. That's just a cop-out. The market system is amazing. I am an economist. I love Adam Smith. I think his invisible hand is one of the deepest insights in social science. But Adam Smith never claimed that you should leave everything to the market, nor would he come and approach things that have widespread societal effects, external effects, what economists would call, such as transformative technologies, that the market system is going to benefit everybody or it's going to generate the best outcome. In fact, even for things that are much less sweeping in their implications, such as pharmaceuticals, cars, medical procedures, we use a series of regulations to make sure that consumers are informed, they are safe, that they are not manipulated, that companies don't abuse their powers. And we know that when you don't do that, even very well-meaning companies under market pressure, such as car companies in the 1950s, don't do the obvious safety fixes. We would not have gotten seat belts and better steering and safer braking systems if it wasn't for regulations. So it's insane to think that somehow OpenAI and Sam Altman and the Microsoft OpenAI's partnership, just out of their own good heart and wisdom, are going to do just the best thing for us, and we don't need to have any input from other experts or regulators or the democratic citizenry. So we need regulations, but I wouldn't say I know the silver bullet that's going to fix it. I think the process of regulation works best if it's a democratic process, meaning that we try various different options that are consistent with our democratic principles, and we learn and update accordingly. So I wouldn't say that GDPR, for example, passed by the European Commission, the General Data Protection Regulation, has been an unqualified success in protecting privacy or manipulation by by tech companies in data collection. But it was a very important step. It came out of a clear recognition of a problem, systemic violations of privacy, abusive data collection practices, and it tried to develop solutions to it. And I think we have to approach every problem like that and with some flexibility. In the case of GDPR, we should now make it stronger and update it, because we've seen how big tech companies can circumvent it by adopting gimmicks and making consumers agree to their data policies, or they have no option. So I think it's a dynamic process. That's how we should approach it. But there are some obvious things that we can do in order to curb the power of tech companies.
I think we could actually, if we can spend a little time on past examples of proper regulation. I mean, we can always go to like the post-Gilded Age era in the United States, and it's trust busting. But could that be a lesson for the platforms of today's?
Absolutely, I think there are many things we can learn from the progressive era. One of them is about democracy again. Nobody would say that American institutions at the time were even close to perfect. There was a disproportionate power of these huge trusts such as Standard Oil, JP Morgan, railway companies. There was no income tax. There was very little in terms of a regulatory state. But at the end, what happened is the democratic process worked. There was a bottom-up movement, which then coalesced around progressive era politicians. And as a result, you had some very important signature legislation, such as introduction of the income tax, regulation, antitrust policies. But today, you look at it, and the companies we're dealing with are much more powerful than Standard Oil, but we have given up on antitrust. So that can't be the right thing to do. If Standard Oil was a problem, I think Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft are a problem too. And they are having much more pervasive effects on every aspect of our lives. But I also emphasize in both Power and Progress and in my other writing that antitrust is not a panacea. It's not going to be a full solution, because what we need to do is find a different direction of AI. So what I call redirecting technological change. And just breaking up big companies is not going to get us that. It could be a step towards that, because it curbs the excessive political power of these companies, but it's not going to get us there by itself.
Refocus on AI. I mean, the way you portray it, we may be, unless there is some sort of a democratic process to regulating it, to come up with the proper solutions that are actually that are going to benefit everyone, every stakeholder. We are probably facing a little bit of a dystopian future. Don't you agree?
Well, I would say there is a dystopian future that is quite likely, but it's also avoidable. Mm-hmm. Some of the other aspect of the current discussion in the United States that I find very misleading is all of this focus on artificial general intelligence and superintelligence and evil robots, which again makes people passive because it makes them worry about things that A, they cannot do anything about, and B, it's just frankly so ridiculous that there isn't anything serious you can do. Oh yes, you can worry about safety research, about what will do when super intelligent robots come. Instead, the problem is that with the technologies that we have at hand, we can do a lot of damage. So how can we actually deal with those damages? And what happens if we don't deal with them? And I think the dystopian future is one where current AI technologies, as a continuation of social media, destroy democracy. They increase much bigger inequality between the very rich and the rest of society, the tech companies and their executives being the very rich. And they also displace a lot of people from their jobs, so they increase labor income inequality. All of these are very, very highly dystopian, and they could be coupled with even worse mental health, even more apathy, even more alienation among the population. So I think there are a lot of bad things that can happen, but we need to be clear that those are not, inevitable. They are implications of how we are using the technologies. And that's why there is hope that we can decide to use the technology differently. We can develop it differently. And that's what the redirection agenda is.
Do legislators and politicians listen to you and colleagues of yours who are sort of raising these questions about how to approach this technological innovation?
Well, I think they are much more open today than they were 5 years ago. The first time I testified in front of U.S. lawmakers on AI almost 5 years ago, one Republican said, why are you wasting our time with AI? We should worry about things like budget deficits, and AI is not something we should worry about. And that has changed. Last year when I testified again, there were senators, lawmakers, staffers from both major parties who were extremely well informed and extremely to the point about the concerns that AI brings in terms of deep fakes, manipulation, inequality, and so on. So I think there is greater understanding of these dangers. Nevertheless, I believe we need to take one more step in the public debate, and that's what I just mentioned a second ago with the redirection agenda. Still the way that both Democrats and Republicans think is, well, we need to put some guardrails so that AI models don't do damage or are not abused. But this idea that there is just an amazing, promising collective knowledge that we have now on tech, but we need to redirect how we use it to produce technologies that are pro-democratic, pro-worker, reduce inequality, create jobs. I think that is not there. So the path of technology is still seen as something that's outside of regulation, outside of the influence of the democratic process, and I think that's wrong.
You mean that the prevailing sort of the sort of a naive, almost like a naive techno-optimism that, I
think I would say it's a techno-determinism.
Techno-determinism. Mm-hmm.
Meaning that we as democratic citizens, we as regular individuals, academics, journalists, or we as workers have no capability of altering the direction of technology. Tech entrepreneurs can perhaps make us go faster and produce more brilliant technologies, but technology will do whatever it will do. That is what I have always argued against throughout my career. The direction of technology is highly malleable. Various economic factors, social factors, political factors affect it. You can create from nuclear technology. You can create very peaceful means of producing energy that can help us against the climate change challenge, or you can produce nuclear weapons. So there are many different ways in which we can pursue and advance our knowledge, and their implications are widely different.
Do you think this year is a big election year in the United States? Do you think whatever the outcome of presidential election is going to be, do you think is what will the impact on this kind of thinking will be?
Well, I think this is a very, very consequential election. I think if Trump is elected, there is a real danger that American democracy may not survive. He is a even more formidable threat to American democracy than he was in 2020. And I think if he had been elected for a second term in 2020, there were real doubts about what would happen to American democracy. I think they are even worse today. So I think we are talking about a very, very consequential election. But moreover, I think leaving those very, very important issues on the future of democracy, future of American institutions, legal system, Trump is much more beholden to corporate interests, especially some of the most questionable elements in Silicon Valley have now started coalescing around Trump. So I also think he would be very unwilling to take any kinds of regulatory action against the worst practices in Silicon Valley.
My last question: what are the most pressing economic issues we are facing, and what are they ahead of us?
Well, I think the most pressing economic issue around the world is going to be to create shared prosperity. How can we ensure economic growth? Not growing is not an option. Degrowth is not an option for most countries around the world. How can we ensure growth that is then shared within the population so that everybody benefits? Workers see wage increases. Poverty is reduced, inequality doesn't explode. And I think we have all been doing badly on this. Europe has slowed down a lot. United States has, for the last 40 years, generated growth, but growth has been A, slower than it was before, and B, very, very unequally distributed. So the shared prosperity challenge is ahead of us. And everything else, I think, it pales in comparison. Budget deficits, inflation, I think they matter to the extent that they influence whether we can build shared prosperity. But shared prosperity, I think, is the biggest challenge. And that's why the direction of technology is so important.
Says Daron Acemoglu. Thank you very much for spending time with us.
Thank you for having me on the program. It's my pleasure.